Hi, I'm Mary Masalio, a Vice President Distinguished Analyst at Gartner. I've led several sessions at many Gartner conferences through the years, and if there's one thing I can say about them, it's that attending them is the best way to stay ahead of the competition. Each conference I've been to provides attendees with invaluable insights and ideas, and the content is always relevant and tailored to key issues being faced by leaders in every core business, be it finance, HR, sales, IT, supply chain, or marketing. Join me at a Gartner conference to learn about emerging trends and gain new perspectives that you won't be able to find anywhere else. Leave our conferences ready to contribute more at work, and most importantly, be equipped with the skills to turn new ideas into action. Visit Gartner.com/conferences or the link in the description of this podcast to learn more.
Welcome to Gartner ThinkCast. I'm Karen Stokes-Lockhart, and today we're discussing when not to use generative AI. As we continue to incorporate AI into our everyday lives, especially in our own work, it's really worth considering when is Gen AI not appropriate and which other AI techniques are. To help break it down, today we're talking with Leinar Ramos, a Senior Director Analyst here at Gartner, who counsels AI, applications, and other IT leaders on key management priorities regarding artificial intelligence. Leinar, welcome in.
Thanks for having me.
We always like to start at the high level. And so if you could give us a kind of short explanation on where we are with Gen AI and the hype surrounding it.
Sure. And thanks for having me again, Karen. It's a pleasure. So I'll say a couple of things here in terms of where we are with Gen AI. Mm-hmm. First is a big part of the picture is that Gen AI is being widely adopted in organizations. And in fact, we see this in our data. In a recent survey, for instance, we found that Gen AI is already the most popular AI technique, and that's ahead of other popular techniques that we're going to talk about. And so we've seen a lot of AI adoption much faster than what we will have initially expected. However, the second thing to mention is that Gen AI is currently at the top of our Gartner hype cycle, at what we call the peak of inflated expectations. And typically when we are at that peak, there is a disconnect between what the technology can currently do and what the vendors and the press and the public believe that the technology is capable of. Right? So this hype, that's the other thing we're seeing, is pushing organizations to over-focus on Gen AI to the exclusion of everything else in the world of AI.
And when you talk about that disconnect between reality and explanations, we know what comes next, that trough of disillusionment.
That's right.
So tell us more about what's the most common misunderstanding you've been seeing when it comes to Gen AI?
So we're starting to hear more and more people, and this is not just from the IT side, but also from the business side, starting to equate AI with Gen AI. And that I would say is a big misunderstanding and a big issue. This is a little bit like the old saying that if all you have is a hammer, then everything starts looking like a nail, right? Same thing is true here for Gen AI. If we look at all of our business problems with a Gen AI lens, then there's a risk of using Gen AI for the wrong use cases. And also, I would say missing out on the broader opportunities that come from those other more established AI tools.
Yeah, I definitely hear that. And I think when we all think of AI, Gen AI is probably the first thing that comes to mind for most of us. So maybe you can give us some examples that aren't as obvious or aren't as top of mind as Gen AI.
Yes, the best way, again, to think about AI is as a toolbox. And we have really all kinds of different tools that have really nothing to do with Gen AI. For example, in the space of machine learning, we think about machine learning, which is about learning from data. You have machine learning that is not generative. Some people call this predictive machine learning. Typically, you'll have a whole set of data, and you're trying to learn to make specific predictions based on that data. And that was, by the way, the most popular AI technique before generative AI came into the picture a couple of years ago. Okay. But I'll say, but even beyond machine learning, there are all kinds of different techniques that are not about learning from data. So you have techniques like simulation, for instance, where you use models that simulate the real world to run different business scenarios. You have optimization, which is about, say, maximizing a specific business objective within certain constraints. Knowledge graphs, It's a really exciting space for a lot of our clients where you have these explicit representations of, say, your customers and products, different entities, their relationships, and you can build analytics on top of that. And even rule-based systems, which is creating a system of rules by which to make decisions in a more automated but also explainable way. So there are many alternative techniques to GenAI, and there are many more that I didn't mention here. But the point is that some of these techniques can be extremely valuable. And there are hundreds of use cases that can be built with these techniques. I will argue, in fact, that currently, most of the current business value that we have in AI lies outside of generative AI and more into these alternative techniques.
Interesting. Okay. And I know we're going to get into talking a little bit more about when not to use Gen AI. But before we do, I would love to explore a little bit with you on, so when is Gen AI appropriate and what is it actually good for?
I'm really glad that you asked that question, Karen, because I wanted to say one thing at the front, which is I'm not a skeptic, and we're not skeptics in Gartner about generative AI. So I'm not here to tell you that Gen AI is useless or something like this. On the contrary, It can be very, very useful for the right use cases. So that's the argument we're making here. For the right use cases, generative AI can be very useful. So there are three areas for which we think generative AI is a great fit. And this is part of the research note that we recently worked on. So there are three areas. The most visible one of these is the ability to generate content, so content generation. And by that, I don't mean just text, but you can include also code, images, audio, video, even combinations of all of those things. So that's content generation. But even beyond content generation, you also have, for instance, large language models in particular, being really good at improving conversational interfaces. So you can think about this ability to chat, to have a natural language conversation with, say, your software, your documents. That is very valuable. And of course, we had chatbots for a long time, but LLMs, I think, have really proven to be very useful to augment or even replace those. The final thing to call out is knowledge discovery. So GenAI is not only good at generating content, but also at processing content, making it more accessible. So a big opportunity here that we see a lot of our clients going for is to build things like question answer systems so that employees can ask questions based on their internal documents. So lots of opportunities, again, in the GenAI space, but it's not a silver bullet. That's the main message. There are all kinds of use cases for which GenAI is really not a good fit. And we need to be mindful of those as well.
Got it. So content generation, conversational interfaces, and I think we all saw the recent demo of that, and then the knowledge discovery in terms of places where it is good.
Correct.
Wonderful. Well, we covered a little bit high level about AI, Gen AI versus some of the other techniques. We're going to take a short break, and then when we come back, we can dive right into when not to use Gen AI. Are you in a new role? Chances are you're not alone. At any given time, a quarter of executives are in transition, with 40% underperforming on meeting their objectives. A new role requires a new plan, and Gartner provides the insight, guidance, and tools you need to make an impact now and throughout your tenure. Visit Gartner.com or click in the link on the show notes to download our exclusive action plan and speed up your impact. So getting back into it, let's dive right in. So when or where is Gen AI not the right tool to use?
Yeah, so this was the focus of our recent research note, where we identified 4 families of use cases for which Gen AI is currently not the best approach. It shouldn't be really the primary technique. Some people call this anti-patterns, and there's 4 of them. So the first really is planning and optimization. So you can think of use cases like supply chain planning, like marketing allocation, something like pricing optimization in retail. So really all kinds of valuable use cases. And generative AI models, at least for now, are notoriously bad at planning ahead, at reasoning ahead, and cannot explicitly optimize for, say, a given objective in a way that makes sense for these kinds of use cases. So that's the first one.
So I'm curious for that one. Why is Gen AI notoriously bad at this?
It's mostly a feature of the way that generative models are trained. And people have been working, to be fair, on improving the reasoning capabilities, the planning capabilities of generative AI models, even since they came to the picture. But they lack this reliability. They're also not good at exact calculations. So for things like optimization and planning, you often need to make exact, precise calculations to be able to determine, okay, what's the optimal in marketing allocation, for instance, what is the optimal allocation of marketing budget across different channels, for instance. So they struggle with math, they struggle with analytics. There are ways around that, but there are also much better techniques that can be used that have been around for a long time for this kind of use cases.
Got it.
Cool. So that's the first one. But the second is related to this is forecasting. So it's currently, I'll say, not the best idea to use GenAI for forecasting use cases. You can think about sales forecasting, predicting like inventory levels, even things like predictive maintenance, where you're forecasting the future from the past data. Now, again, there's a big push to use LLMs for time series forecasting right now. But at least at the moment, it's very brittle. It's not really widely deployed as well. So GenAI models can be used tangentially, but really not as the primary AI technique to do forecasting. There are much better ways to do this in AI.
Okay. And when you say better ways, any like initial feedback on which one you would use for that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of alternative techniques. So for instance, I was talking about predictive machine learning before, which is the non-generative type of machine learning where you have a set of data features, and from that past data, from those features, you're trying to make a concrete prediction. Right? So that's the traditional type of machine learning, and that's still really good for all this kind of forecasting. The other one I'll mention is simulation. So simulation is a very different setup where you have a specific model that you created that allows you can configure it in different ways to be able to test what if scenarios. And this can be very useful for forecasting. So what if customer demands goes up? What if it goes down? What if there's a recession happening? All kinds of scenarios that you will be able to try out via simulation. And you will then really be able to do this kind of things with generative AI alone.
Got it.
Perfect. So that's the second, forecasting. The third one is a big one for me, and that is the use of GenAI for decision intelligence, for decision engineering. Here, I get concerned when people are using things like LLMs for very critical decisions. So, for instance, in recruitment, people using LLMs to read resumes and then make recommendations as to which applicant gets to move forward to the next round of interviews. Right? This is the kind of case where generative AI models are, one, they're unreliable, but two, they also lack explainability. So even if it's a good prediction, you wouldn't be able to understand why it's making that prediction. And there's a lot of bias in these models. They've been trained on the internet. There are some research papers that show this very clearly around this bias. So you have to be very careful about how you use GenAI as part of your kind of decision intelligence type of use cases.
Makes sense. Also makes me wonder rhetorically, is it better or worse than humans in terms of the reliability and the explanations?
That is a great point. We always have to compare against humans, and humans are biased, and humans are unreliable as well. So that's a completely fair point. We just get used to our unreliability. That's
exactly
great. So but again, here we're comparing against other AI techniques. And there are other techniques. So, for instance, if you are building a loan approval workflow,
right,
and you need that to be explainable, I wouldn't really use large language models for that, which is this black box really that we don't understand. There are other techniques like rule-based systems in that case that are explainable. Maybe they are not as powerful in terms of the predictive power, but they are explainable and you can understand how the system works. So that's one example, not the only one, of alternative techniques. Finally,
sense.
Yeah, so the final one, just to finish this with this story of the types of use cases for which GenAI is not a good fit, is related to this, and this is autonomous systems. So as it stands today, GenAI systems, I would say, are neither capable enough nor robust enough to be autonomous. You often need what people call a human in the loop.
Okay.
So this is a human that is overseeing the outputs that come from these generative AI systems. And that really doesn't scale for use cases for which you need full autonomy. For instance, you can think about algorithmic trading in finance or robotics use cases. So almost by definition, in these use cases, you need full autonomy. You cannot have this human in the loop. And at least for now, generative AI systems are not robust enough for that kind of use case. Now, there's a big push again towards something called AI agents. These are systems that are based on generative AI models, or could be based on generative AI models that can behave more autonomously. So, for instance, you can give them more complex objectives, and they can break them down and execute them in an iterative way. You're going to hear a lot about AI agents this year, I believe. But for now, there's a lot of time to get there, really, and to get the systems to be robust enough. And here, one message is that you might see a very impressive demo from one of these AI agents. But you always have to remember that you're looking potentially at the best example that the vendor could find. So there's a separate question of, is this performance the same performance that I will see all across my hundreds of scenarios that I will have in my enterprise setting? So there's a big difference between demo and being reliable in production. So those are the four families of that we identify of where GenAI is really not a good fit as the primary AI technique.
Okay. And just to recap the four, so it was planning and optimization, forecasting, decision intelligence or engineering, and then the autonomous systems.
That's correct. That's absolutely right.
Very helpful. So, which leads to the natural question of, so what happens if you pick the wrong AI technique, or you're just defaulting to GenAI automatically? What's the impact to the organization?
Right. So the first thing is very simple. If you use GenAI for the wrong use cases, then you're more likely to fail in those use cases. And it sounds simple, but it really matters right now, because I will say last year in 2023 was all about piloting generative AI. But this year, 2024, is all about getting serious and actually demonstrating value. So being successful with generative AI use cases. So we need to pick the right battles with GenAI. That's number one. But then the other subtle issue that we've been discussing that could be a potential impact is that if we just focus on GenAI, we're likely to miss out on all the other opportunities that come from the alternative techniques we were discussing, which again are a much better fit for the kinds of use cases that we just went through, the four categories that we were discussing. So there's that risk of missing out on that value. And finally, I will also add here that if we exclusively focus on GenAI, we're also likely to miss out on the potential combinations between different techniques. So some of the most powerful AI systems right now are really a combination of different AI techniques. So you might, for instance, use GenAI as a conversational interface that could link to a powerful, say, a planning and optimization system on the backend that is built with alternative AI techniques. And the combined system could be more robust because you have different strengths and weaknesses in different techniques. So that's, again, a more subtle issue if we just focus on GenAI.
Yeah, and I think that one in particular is one I rarely hear people talking about. So I'm glad that you highlighted that today.
Absolutely.
So our time went by so quickly. So if we end back at the high level, what's one takeaway that you would love to leave us all with?
Yes, the main takeaway is that AI does not revolve around GenAI. GenAI is only one out of many techniques. It's not a silver bullet. As valuable and as impressive as GenAI can be, it is often not the right tool to tackle many use cases. And that's the main message, really. And I'll say that we need to communicate this message to our business partners, our IT teams, our AI teams as well, because otherwise, as we were just discussing, we'll end up using GenAI for the wrong problems and missing out also on the true potential of that broader AI space as well.
Leinar, thank you so much. It was great talking with you, and I think like that's a great place to end, kind of broaden the perspective and evaluate what technique is going to be right for your specific use case.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen.
Well, thank you all for listening to this latest episode of ThinkCast featuring Leinar Ramos, Gartner's Senior Director Analyst. If you want to learn more about our topic today, visit Gartner.com to read the full article and determine how you can get your own enterprise AI ready. ThinkCast will be back wherever you listen to podcasts 2 weeks from today. In the meantime, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with a colleague so neither of you will miss it.
ThinkCast is a production of Gartner. This podcast may not be reproduced or distributed in any form without Gartner's permission. It consists of the opinions of Gartner's research organization, which should not be construed as statements of fact. Content provided by other speakers is expressly the views of the speaker and/or their organization. While the information contained in this podcast has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, Gartner disclaims all warranties as to the accuracy, completeness, or adequacy of such information. Although Gartner research may address legal and financial issues, Gartner does not provide legal or investment advice, and its research should not be construed or used as such.